I want to turn to SCOTUS, our Supreme Court, and an absolutely extraordinary story that you really have to know in detail, even if you've heard some of the headlines. We're living through a time when democracy is under assault. Our institutions are at risk, and the Supreme Court, even with its faults and blemishes, is an independent place where life-tenured justices are a backstop. Indeed, remember in 2020, for all of the other divisions in our lives in America, the court was, on a bipartisan basis, able to say that there was no merit to the challenges to Biden's victory. That was something that Republican and Democratic appointed justices could agree on. That's why there never was a Bush v. Gore style case that even reached the court, let alone siding with some of the lies coming out of what was the sitting president. That's not nothing. It's a good thing to have an independent court that can stand up to the person who still has their finger on the proverbial button. And yet now, we're looking at a story that questions the independence of at least one member of this court in grave ways, which leads us to calls for one member of this court, one justice and his wife, to potentially testify under oath in what would be an unprecedented investigation into their role in hiding communications with another branch, secret, what in court is called ex parte communications by the wife of this justice, as there was an attempted coup going on. I'm saying this very deliberately in this way to give you a sense of the import, because that's where we're at. A nation learning new and explosive details about how deeply involved the wife of a current Supreme Court Justice, Clarence Thomas, was in efforts to overthrow the election. Now, I'm talking about Ginni Thomas, and the Washington Post is reporting that she went on an unrelenting effort, a plot, to help executive branch officials and others push the big lie. Now, she is, of course, entitled to all of her views and beliefs. She's a longtime conservative activist. Back in 2010, she gave a speech discussing her views on a Democratic-run United States.
We are witnessing an acceleration of power grabs in Washington. It's the left's version of shock and awe. If our rights are loaned to the government and ruled by an elite in Washington that thinks they know better. We are living in a diminished state of liberty right now, and freedom has never been this fragile.
That is her right. That was in public. That was transparent. Her view was that Barack Obama being president and some of the other things you heard her mention meant that freedom was more at risk than ever before. This scandal tonight is different. You may have heard the outlines of it. But let's get into exactly what it is, because thanks to an investigation and leaks, the only reason this ever went public in the first place, we're learning about a series of several dozen texts that she sent to the White House all around this big lie period and ultimately an attempted coup, which raises profound questions about her husband's independence on the high court that would ultimately potentially rule on this kind of stuff. She texted the top official in the White House under Trump, Mark Meadows, that the left was attempting the greatest heist of our history because Biden had won the election. She said the Biden crime family, quote, will be living in barges off Gitmo to face military tribunals for sedition. Now, you may hear that and say, gosh, another unhinged rant, a QAnon blog post. But we're talking about someone who shares a home with and a life with and a marriage with a justice of the Supreme Court. They actually do decide on whether or not something's sedition and whether or not imprisonment is warranted. It's also obviously on the facts absurd and embarrassing, since it is the rioters at the Jan 6 rally who are facing sedition charges, not random people who participated in the election, not the Biden family, which suggests her grasp on the law is tenuous at best. She would go on in these leaked texts to encourage Mr. Meadows, quote, make a plan, release the Kraken, and save us from the left, a reference to a right-wing conspiracy theory that there is some sort of Kraken-style alliance that would help Trump stay in office. She also said, you must buck up your team on the inside, Mark. So this was her secret coordination with Donald Trump's top aide at a time when they were trying to overthrow the election. Now, the last text that they have, according to this leak, which I mentioned comes during the Jan 6 probe and first obtained by the Washington Post, was on January 10th. That's 4 days after the Stop the Steal rally, which she attended, and the insurrection, which she said she didn't. She denounced then the rioters who stormed the Capitol and said she was still, quote, disgusted with Mike Pence. Quote, we are living through what feels like the end of America, the end of liberty. That is her overwrought and somewhat disturbing summary of the peaceful outcome of an election. That's what she says is the end of liberty, not the January 6th rally that was called Stop the Steal that she attended. Now, the texts come at a crucial time when Trump and his allies thought they might get to the Supreme Court to help negate the election results or overturn them. The Times notes that Thomas effectively toggled between like-minded members of the executive and the legislative branches as her husband, who sits atop the judiciary branch that is supposed to serve as a check on the other branches of government, heard election-related cases, end quote. I'm reading that from the New York Times because it really puts it as clearly as possible. You're looking at a plot to also override the independence that the Supreme Court has in these kind of cases. Some Democrats are already saying Justice Thomas must recuse himself from any of these cases. Others, including Senator Blumenthal, say he actually has to come testify before the January 6th committee. He hasn't, of course, testified before the Congress since his confirmation hearings, which were volatile. Justice Thomas has not exactly rebutted concerns about his independence here. Indeed, he was the sole dissent in not one but two cases that made it all to the Supreme Court that touched on January 6th. In other words, every other Republican appointee and every Democratic appointee went one way, and he curiously went the other way. At the time, the public didn't know what they were hiding about his wife's role here. The Supreme Court declined to hear a case filed by the Pennsylvania Republican Party involving mail ballots, and Thomas wrote there was a compelling interest in rooting out the mere appearance of corruption in the political process, end quote. The other case involved Trump trying to hide January 6 documents from the investigation. Now, you may remember that one. It was a rebuke of Trump. If not for Thomas, it would have been 9-0. 8-1 is still incredibly strong. It tells you, and I will just simplify here and say as a lawyer, it tells you that there aren't a lot of real issues of law, that it's not a close call when 8 people on the court who sometimes disagree on matters of civil rights and democracy and voting all come together and say, no, you got to turn this stuff over. We're not having a secret kind of conspiracy continue where Congress can't investigate a violent attack on the floor of Congress. That's what all the Trump justices said. Think about that. All 3 people appointed by Trump said no, they're going to get to the bottom of this. The lone dissenter was Thomas, which is pretty curious because it was 1 month after his wife signed this letter saying that panel that he sided against was overtly partisan in its political persecution. Now, she has not spoken out since these texts leaked. She did say earlier this month, Clarence does not discuss his work with me, and I don't involve him in my work. Well, among other things, I have bad news for Ms. Thomas. If she thinks she has access to Mark Meadows and other people at the White House because of her independent expertise, well, there's literally no evidence to suggest that. Her work is his work because it's the reason she has access to all these power players. Now, there's much we don't know yet. At what point does Ginny Thomas completely undermine her husband's independence? Any honest judge is going to have to recuse from cases that directly involve their family, especially if their family is basically an hour away from other people's crimes. It's an open question whether any of this will move Justice Thomas. But we also have insight into how he feels about his wife's actions. Here's one quip he previously made.
I keep a sign on my desk. Don't make fun of your wife's choices. You were one of them.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And that's so true.
It is so true. They did choose each other. They chose their worldviews. And we have to choose whether we want to believe that these people who are apparently so passionate about these issues, including being the only dissent in the case at the court or being the only Supreme Court family member we know about who was at the Stop the Steal rally, we have to choose whether we believe that they never talk about any of this stuff. This is a big one.